They say if you work hard, you'll get ahead. But how do you pass something down that you were never allowed to have? Because some families didn't get rich from hard work, they got rich from owning people. When they talk about slavery in school, it's usually quick, a chapter, a sentence, and then they move on. But what they don't explain is that slavery wasn't just pain, it was a business, and it was a big one. Let me tell you about Isaac Franklin and John Armfield. They weren't just slaveholders, they were business partners, and they ran the largest slave trading operation in the United States from 1828 to 1836. Armfield handled most of the buying and organizing in Virginia, while Franklin focused on sales down south. Their three main hubs were Alexandria, Virginia, Natchez, Mississippi, and New Orleans, Louisiana. And they had offices in all three. They had routes, they had systems, they had agents working in almost every major southern city. This wasn't some side hustle, this was a machine. Armfield stayed in Alexandria at their headquarters on Duke Street, which is now called the Freedom House Museum. But back then, it was a slave jail with business in the front and human beings locked in the back. Franklin and Armfield was the actual name of the company, and it was a real business. They had contracts, records, shipping schedules, holding pens. They even ran ads in newspapers to buy enslaved people for cheap. And then they would flip them in the Deep South for a huge profit. And picture this, they even offered payment plans. You could actually buy a slave on credit with installments, like it was a car or a piece of furniture. Men, women, children, it didn't matter. If they could be sold, they were inventory. Some of those children were as young as 10, probably even younger. Lovey, Elizabeth, Bill, Monroe, their names are still in the sales logs, their heights, their ages, like they were livestock. In the back of the building, they were locked in two-story holding pens. During the day, they were forced to walk in circles inside whitewashed courtyards waiting to be sold. And how did they move people? Sometimes by boat, packed tight in inhumane conditions. Other times, they made them walk in something called a coddle. And that's when people were chained together, sometimes 100 at a time. And they marched them through the heat, the rain, the mud, and the mountains. Barefoot, starving, and exhausted. Can you imagine? You got to use the bathroom, but you can't stop. You fall, they all fall. But that's how they move human beings. They moved between 1,000 to 2,000 people every year, and they made millions. Now, remember when we talked about Angola? We talked about the Angola 3, the prison system, the forced labor, and we talked about it being a plantation before it was a prison. And can you guess who owned it? Yep, Isaac Franklin. When he died in 1846, he left it to his wife, and she eventually sold it to the state. And that's when Angola Plantation became Angola Prison. Same land, same labor, just a different name. He also owned Fairview Plantation in Tennessee. He had land, money, power, and everything. But here's something strange. Isaac Franklin had 9 children, and not one of them lived to adulthood. Now, I'm not mentioning that to be cruel, because losing a child is heartbreaking no matter who you are. But when you think about how many families he destroyed, how many babies he separated from their mothers, it just makes you wonder. And while Franklin eventually brought his nephew into the business, John Armfield was the major partner from the beginning. He wasn't family by blood, but he helped build the operation from the ground up. He organized supply, Franklin handled the sales. Together, they created a system of trafficking that lasted years and shaped an entire region. And when it was all over, they retired, like it was just a regular business. Franklin died a wealthy man. Armfield gave huge donations to the University of the South. They sold the business, they passed down the money, they passed down the land. And that's what you call generational wealth. Meanwhile, we pass down the trauma. You ever hear somebody say, "My people didn't leave me nothing"? It's because they weren't allowed to have anything. We were born into death, or in a hospital before we even made it home. While some people are born with trust funds, land, property, and connections. One game, two different starting lines. But don't get it twisted. We're not weak. We've been fighting, and we're still fighting. But to fight smart, we got to know the truth. Because this history, it's not just a lesson, It's a warning. Slavery wasn't just brutality, it was business. It was paperwork, contracts, offices, shipping routes, payment plans, and the money is still circulating, still sitting in family names, still shaping the country we live in. So stay aware, stay vigilant, because this story is how they got their head start. And now it's up to us to finish the race. Remember to comment, like, share, and repost, and subscribe for more stories that they won't put in your textbook. Peace.